After having played with Adam Warlock enough to get him to Lord status, I feel like I've learned a few things about how to play him effectively, so I figured I'd share my thoughts. Adam Warlock is probably the weakest healer in Marvel Rivals, at least as far as healing goes. He reminds me a lot of Zenyatta from Overwatch, being more like a damage character masquerading as a healer because he happens to have one healing ability and an ultimate related to healing. Fortunately, Adam's healing is far more potent than Zenyatta's, it just suffers from a different flaw. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's break down his abilities one by one, starting with Adam's primary fire is very simple. He uses his staff to fire magic hit scan shots that deal 60 damage with the potential to crit on headshot, dealing double damage. You get 15 shots and can fire fairly quickly with a decently quick reload time as well. Feels very similar to firing a pistol, just one that is extremely powerful. If you can consistently land headshots, or even just lots of body shots, Adam can absolutely devastate non-tanks with relative ease and can assist in tank takedowns pretty adequately as well. If your accuracy is lacking, however, you have another option that may work a little better.
Pure cosmic energy.
This is Adam's secondary fire, where instead of firing shots one at a time, you charge up 5 shots and then fire them off in a big burst for big damage. There's a few properties that the cluster possesses to make it different beyond the obvious, though. Firstly, the shots deal less damage than normal firing, with each bullet fired dealing a less than staggering 38 damage. The problem amplified by the inability to deal crits. The second wrinkle is that instead of hit scan shots, you're firing projectiles, meaning your shots are very much dodgeable for people who see them coming, though they travel fast enough that you should be able to land at least a couple of hits, irrespective of evasive maneuvers. Finally, since your staff only holds 15 shots, you're going to be reloading a lot more often if you prioritize this over the primary fire. That being said, you can still charge the full 5 shots regardless of how much energy you've got left, so even if you only have 1 shot left, you'll use your magic to pull 4 more out of your ass to do the full ability. If you land all 5 shots, you should do about 190 damage, which is nothing to sneeze at, even if landing crits with the primary fire is more effective in the long run, but my aim isn't great most of the time, so I prefer to use this. With these two firing modes combined, Adam is on the higher end of damage output from healers, and while neither version is necessarily more effective, I will mention that if you're trying to shoot a flying enemy down, you will almost certainly have better luck using the primary fire. Outside of that, it mostly comes down to personal preference. However, I have discovered a little trick with mixing the two to maximize damage output. That being that if you hold down the primary attack button while firing a cosmic cluster, Adam will instantly follow the 5th shot with a 6th normal shot, which is great since this combo can burst down most squishier targets almost instantly if every shot lands, especially if that last one is a crit.
Healing power.
This is Adam's primary healing ability, and while it is potent, it is also severely lacking due to one big weakness. To start with the positive, the way this ability works is, when activated, you fire a laser at a teammate, which will then bounce between teammates to deal additional healing. Each bounce will output 95 health with a maximum of 2 bounces, meaning that if teammates are bunched together tightly, you will provide 95 health to 3 different people almost instantly. Very nice, but what if your teammates aren't grouping up? Well, you need not worry. If there is nobody to bounce to, your laser will just heal the same target multiple times instead. You can zap a tank, and if they are injured enough, your laser will heal them 3 times instead of bouncing, providing them 285 health immediately. This is without mentioning that the ability has 2 charges, meaning that you can fire it twice in quick succession if you need to. This means that if a tank is at critical health, you can just zap them twice and almost instantly bring them back to full health, which is a great way to prolong a fight. Now, you might be wondering if this has any self-healing properties, and I have good news for you. Every time you fire that laser at someone, you take a little of that healing energy for yourself and recover 35 health. That's it. And now you might be thinking that that's pretty pathetic, and you'd be right, but there is a hidden attribute to this ability that, as far as I've seen, isn't explicitly mentioned in the game or on the official website. That being that if you aren't targeting anyone, then the ray will just target you instead. This will only give you 150 health, so you still don't get the full amount, but that's perfectly serviceable if you need health to prolong a solo fight, or even if all you need is a quick top-up. Just look away towards a wall or something and pop the healing shot, and bam, you're all better. Plus, if a teammate is close enough to you when you heal yourself, the laser will still bounce off of you and go to them without losing too much self-healing. So there's a lot of good to be said about this ability, but why would I claim that Adam is the weakest at healing if this is so good? Unfortunately, this ability has 2 major, almost crippling weaknesses. Weakness number 1 is the cooldown. You have to wait 6 seconds to recharge the ability and fire it again. That may not sound so bad, but if you've ever played a hero shooter before, or any high-action video game really, you know that a lot can happen in 6 seconds. This problem is slightly lessened by the fact that you get 2 charges, but once you've used both, you have to hope and pray that your other healers, if there are any, can pick up your slack and keep them alive while you wait. Personally, I would recommend trying to use 1 charge at a time and save the second for if things start going south. But if your team is really struggling, don't be afraid to pop them when you've got them. The second weakness is the range, which is a measly 20 meters. This is not a lot, and means that you have to be pretty close to a teammate to heal them. I cannot count the number of times I've failed to save a teammate because I fired a laser at an ally in need, only to end up healing myself because they were just a bit too far away. I don't have a lot to say about how to counteract this problem outside of being careful and making absolute sure to wait to shoot until you see the targeting diamond. That said, this healing ability, which is almost your only option for healing people, is pretty powerful in spite of its weaknesses. But it does introduce a theme of sorts about how Adam is designed, one that is significantly more present with Adam's next ability.
You are not alone.
This is one of the most interesting support abilities in the game, with it being powerful enough that it can almost completely nullify certain ultimates on its own. When activated, you forge a soul bond between yourself and any allies within 15 meters, which has a couple of benefits. Firstly, everyone in the soul bond is provided with regeneration at a not insignificant 15 health per second. Secondly, and far more importantly, when damage is dealt to someone in your soul bond, that damage is spread equally between all people who are linked. For example, when you link yourself and one other person and then take a 100 damage hit, instead you and your bond buddy take 50 damage each. Meanwhile, if you bond with 5 people, almost the entire team, that 100 damage hit will deal a rather unimpressive 20 damage to each person. This effect is extremely powerful, and if your team sticks close to you, then most damaging ultimates can be almost completely negated. Nomura's Whale may do a lot of damage at once, but against the Soul Bond, he's just giving your team a nice shower. Iron Fist's Living Chi gives him high damage output that makes him near impossible to shake off without movement abilities, but with the press of a single button, his Fists of Iron are churned into a couple of wet noodles. The only potential exceptions I can think of to this countering ultimates are Scarlet Witch's Big Nuke, and maybe Iron Man's moderately sized nuke. But I haven't really put this to the test, so I'm not 100% confident in that. Of course, there are a couple of downsides, the first being it only lasts 6 seconds. This isn't a lot, of course, so if you want to get the most out of this, you shouldn't just spam it willy-nilly. You have to time it correctly to either counter ults or beat back a big push. The second problem is that it has a 30-second cooldown, which further reinforces the point about not using it whenever you can. You need to be careful and considerate when using what is probably the single most powerful support ability in the game. The final, and likely biggest problem you'll be dealing with, is the range limit I mentioned earlier. If you thought 220 meters was already too small, naturally 15 meters is even worse. This pretty much means that your teammates need to be almost right next to you in order to receive the buff. And this plays into that theme I alluded to earlier. Adam is basically the glue that holds the team together, but only if the team actually sticks to him. This is true to an extent of most healers, of course, but Adam pretty much lives or dies off of whether the team sticks together or not. This means that if your team has a Spider-Man or Iron Fist or Venom is your tank, well, they are likely to charge off at the enemies themselves and leave you in the dust, depriving you of not just the ability to heal them, but also potential soul bond targets, which effectively makes the ability weaker. If your team is made up primarily of diving characters like that, you may be better off picking a different healer to save yourself some frustration. That said, it is also worth asking the question of, can this ability be used for self-healing as well? Technically it can, but I wouldn't recommend it. Basically, if you're being harassed by an enemy or two, you should first just pop your healing charges for extra health, since the cooldown may be extreme, but your survival is more important. After all, you can't do any healing if you're dead. And if the situation is really bad, well, one thing you could try to save yourself is to soul bond yourself before using your healing charges. You won't get any damage resistance since you're the only member of the bond, but the regeneration might give the little extra bit you need to not die. Maybe. It's a total Hail Mary play, but sometimes it's your only option, and it might be worth considering since respawning resets all your cooldowns anyway. After having said all that, I think this is an incredible ability, and definitely makes Adam a better support than he would be with just his healing ability and one other thing I haven't mentioned yet. Honestly, the power of both this and his ultimate makes me wonder if that's why his normal healing is so restricted. But before we get to his ultimate, there's one more ability to cover. This is Adam's one and only passive ability, and it has a very simple effect. The Upon dying in combat, instead of the whole kill cam leading into spectating thing while you wait to respawn, your body vanishes and you transition into becoming a floating golden soul. This can be a little jarring, but that's besides the point. When in soul mode, you have 14 seconds to fly around at truly breakneck speeds, until either time runs out or you press either the primary or secondary attack buttons. If time runs out, then you just die. The same thing happens with the secondary attack. You just kill yourself. But, if you press the primary attack, Adam will form a golden cocoon around himself and come back to life with full health. This is a really cool ability, since it means you won't have to go back to spawn after dying and can instead rejoin the fight immediately. But there are some caveats to keep in mind. The first thing of note is that it has a 105-second cooldown, so you won't get to do this very often, which is a shame, but makes total sense. Second thing is that your abilities won't refresh upon revival like they would normally, so if you popped all your healing before death, you'll still have to wait for those cooldowns. Finally, and most importantly, you are completely visible in Soul 4. Yep, you are not invisible, despite what you might expect. This means that after killing you, the enemies can see where you go, and sometimes they will follow you, so that they can just immediately kill you again if you revive. There isn't really much you can do about this except be annoyed, but if you are followed, you're better off just giving up on revival and respawning normally. There isn't really much else to say about this ability, so now let's move on to Adam's ultimate ability.
Born again!
This is Adam's big super ability, and it's probably the one I find most annoying to actually use, but we'll get into that in a moment. Once you have generated a whopping 5,000 ultimate charge, by far the single highest energy cost for a single ultimate in the game, you can activate the ultimate to have Adam cast a spell using all of his cosmic power to perform necromancy. Okay, I suppose that's not technically what this is, but that doesn't matter because this ultimate does in fact revive the dead, specifically your dead teammates. This is an incredible power that really has the potential to turn the tide of a big fight going poorly, but as always, there are several noteworthy weaknesses to keep in mind. The first thing to remember is a small but important element. This isn't an instant cast. Adam needs a few seconds to complete the spell, so if you die midway through nobody gets revived, then your ultimate is wasted. The second, much bigger problem, is that allies who are revived do not start with full health. Because that would be ridiculously overpowered. Instead, your allies start with 100 health each, and tanks do not get any bonus on top of that. This is not a lot to work with, which means once people start coming back, you will need to heal them ASAP, or they will almost immediately die again, especially those poor tanks, since they're such easy targets. All this is to say that this ability should not be used out in the open. It should be cast behind a wall or something, since everyone you revive will get gunned down immediately, assuming you even manage to complete the spell without getting shot down partway through. With that out of the way, let's talk a little more about how this ability helps your team. To begin with, the description of reviving your team is not completely accurate, something I wish the game had been a little clearer about. Instead, what you are doing is planting a new spawn point for dead teammates. The golden globe that marks the spawn point will stay in place for 10 seconds, after which it will vanish and revival is no longer an option. Adam himself has a 30-meter radius in which teammates who die will be brought back at the spawn point, with teammates outside that circle staying dead. This radius is visible in the form of a large yellow circle painted on the ground to help teammates know exactly where they need to be to get that second chance. This circle actually starts existing the second your ultimate is charged, it's just invisible until you cast it. The game very helpfully keeps a tally of how many revives you can get when casting at the bottom right of the screen just above your abilities. Personally, I would recommend that you wait until there are at least 2 faces in that portion of the screen, so that you get decent value out of the ultimate, but it's up to you. Naturally, if you die before that 10-second timer is up, the golden ball vanishes immediately and your team will be left to fend for themselves. So I would suggest hanging back and not playing too aggressively, since you're basically your team's lifeline for that period. A couple extra things to keep in mind are that a person can only be revived once per ultimate. If a teammate dies and gets revived, only to die again, then it's back to the beginning for them. They won't get a third chance, and you will not be creating an undying army for 10 seconds, sadly. Another thing to note is that technically you can cast this without anyone being dead, and prematurely set up the spawn point just in case something starts going wrong. But personally, I would not suggest this, as not only are you likely to end up wasting it most of the time, but if you are doing your job as a healer correctly, you shouldn't need this unless the enemy starts whipping out ultimates and slaughtering everyone. Just save it for actually reviving people who are already dead. Now that I've covered everything, why do I not like this ultimate? Well, it mostly comes down to the fact that this is pretty much exclusively a reactive ultimate. You can only really use this in response to losing teammates, as that is the only purpose it has. I prefer my ultimates to have a little more versatility than what this has. That being said, while the high cost is a minor issue and the low respawn health is aggravating, I really think tanks should get at least 250 health to start with, so that they're a bit less vulnerable. I would say this is a pretty good ultimate. It's just one that you have to put a lot of thought into using, which isn't really for me. I just like going Unga Bunga on the enemy with something that does a lot of damage, or using healing ultimates to counter enemy ults. Now that we're through all that, let's discuss Adam's last offering.
Yeah, can I have my body back now? Please?
As with most characters in the game, Adam Warlock is involved in the team-up system. In Adam's case, when he is paired with Mantis or Star-Lord, he gives them the incredible power of Regenerative Cocoon. That's it. When teamed up, both Mantis and Peter Quill get the same self-revivability that Adam has. In exchange, Adam currently possesses a permanent 15% increase to all healing done, which is pretty nice. I don't have much to add here, as the Cocoon ability functions the exact same way on your allies as it does you, so everything I said there applies to them as well. Moving on. Adam has a base health of 250 and a movement speed of 6 meters per second, which is pretty average, but one of his biggest weaknesses, and by far the most aggravating thing about playing him, is his lack of any movement abilities. Every other healer offers at least one mobility option, such as dashing or big jumps, but with Adam your only option is walking. This makes returning to the front line painfully slow, especially since if things were going poorly when you died, there's a good chance that as you make your way back, you'll be forced to watch your teammates drop one by one, until eventually, right as you get back, everybody's dead and now you have to wait for them. This also means that if an enemy is bearing down on you, running away isn't an option, since regardless of who you're fighting, they will be able to keep up with you easily, since Adam is pretty much the least mobile character in the game. Another thing that I didn't mention is, supposedly, Soul Bond doesn't just share damage between teammates, but also shares healing. I didn't mention this in the actual Soul Bond section of the video because I'm not fully convinced that this is actually the case. Neither the game nor the official website mention this anywhere that I've seen, and I can't really say I've noticed this in-game, but I figured I should at least mention it, just in case I'm wrong. The final thing I'm going to mention here is that if you play Adam, you should prepare for the possibility of being targeted, since Adam's revival ability make him a high priority for assassin characters especially. I've often experienced the undesirable outcome of having my ultimate ready and waiting for people to die during the big team fight so I can bring them back, only to end up being the first to die. The self-revivability can help counteract this problem, but only sometimes, and since I tend to take the time to get behind a wall or something before cocooning, any people who end up dying are often respawning by the time I return to the land of the living. So that can get annoying. Overall, Adam isn't a terrible healer, but he is probably the hardest alongside Loki to get consistent value out of, and Loki at least has the power to heal people by just shooting them. I do think my biggest issue with Adam does come down to his lack of movement options, since that can be one of the most fun things to do in these sorts of games. But I want to know what you think. Have I misjudged Adam's healing potential? Did I miss something about Karmic Revival that I should have mentioned? Feel free to discuss in the comments, but in the meantime I have more work to do. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.